record on this. All right. Thanks, y'all. Well, with that, I'd like to say welcome to The Climate Crisis is a Care Crisis, how to prepare without burning out. And we'll be looking at a lot of the relationships that we're involved in and how to, cultivate more care into them, because that is part of preparedness is caring. But sometimes our approaches to caring might be a little bit different because of these systems we're in. I'll show you a little bit about what our time together for the next about 90 minutes will look like. We will, if you want, be writing stuff down for reflection. There will be reflection. You might be somebody who's a thinker or maybe more of a drawer. Maybe you are a writer. But however you choose to support yourself in those reflections is welcome. And so I'm suggesting a pen and paper if that's something that you need. Also, as far as what our time together will look like, we'll start with, a little bit of the intro, who I am, land acknowledgement, and then looking at systems of domination and burnout, and then systems of domination and care and what that looks like. And we'll get into some definitions a little bit later on. And then land informed care as a way of resisting these systems of domination, mapping our capacity, because doing something different, something that is in resistance to the current systems, means we need to check in where our energy is coming from. How are we going to sustain ourselves through this revolutionary work? Some of it might seem very soft skilly because it's not something that's often valued by these dominant systems. I liked how you shared, Mona, about being a mama, because that is something that our systems don't always value. And it's like, core to humanity is raising the next generations. So yeah, how do we support ourselves in these things that are revolutionary, that are in resistance to these systems? And then finally, just sharing some tools on land informed, care-centered change makers. So yeah, some things that we might refer to. Sometimes they're like a little bit of a cheat sheet, I feel. Phrases that when I learned them, I was like, oh man, if I could just have said that in this circumstance, I would have made it through that situation a little bit smoother, but I didn't have the words to share what I was experiencing or how I was looking to transition through that moment. And finally, I'll also be sharing a little bit about my Inclusive Community Preparedness Lab, which is a 9-week program that I have. And so, yes, this is a workshop. Yes, this is also something I'm doing for the first time, which is sharing another program in a workshop. And that is something separate that could build on this if you so choose. And also this stands alone. And so with that, I'll let you know a little bit of who is speaking here if you haven't checked out my website. Hey, my name is Daniela Guerrero Rodriguez. I use she, they pronouns. And I start with always sharing that I'm an auntie. That places me in relationship with those around me who have given me that name. Rather than starting with degrees or my job title or things like that. What's more important to me is my relationships. And so I lead with that in both professional and personal settings. And I'm sharing that because it's something that to me was new when I heard somebody say it. And I'm like, yeah, that is something I want to adopt and something I hadn't thought of, even though it is something that I carry with me all the time that I value. So again, how do we resist these current systems? Even just how we identify the care that we offer and the care that's offered to us. And so that is one of the ways that I move through the world. I'm also a Central American immigrant and settler of mixed heritage. I share that because it places my ancestors, my perspectives, how I live on the lands that I'm on now, and highlights my responsibilities to the land that I'm on now as well. That's something we'll talk about a little bit later. I'm also a prepper, a facilitator, and an artist. I'm an inclusive prepper. I have always thought of all those folks around me. I'm the oldest of 9 kids, and so being prepared for everything was always a thing. And that's just something that went into my emergency preparedness. As far as facilitating, I love teaching. Maybe that was something else that came with having all of these kids in my life. And so it's something that's rolled into these workshops that I totally love creating and sharing some of the practices that I am doing outside of teaching through teaching to helpfully help others inform the work that they're doing in community. And I'm an artist, and that is a way that I express myself and understand my thoughts. As I create art, it reflects back to me how I'm thinking or moving through the world, and then I'm able to better build on that. Some folks might be writers, some folks might have little ones in your life that are reflecting back to you how you're moving through the world. And being an artist is one of the ways that I enjoy doing that. And as for some of my more professional experience, so it's not like, all of this other stuff, there's also some stuff I know. I worked 17 years as a frontline mental health worker with youth. I have done 5 years of leadership development work, 4 years in emergency and community preparedness, both in frontline mental health work and in community spaces. And I have a BA in intercultural studies and an MEd in arts for social change. And so that's kind of how everything comes together around the work that I'm doing here. And now that I've introduced me, introduce a little bit about the land that I'm on, and maybe prompt some reflections for you about the lands that you're on. I'm here living on the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. There was never any treaties signed here, and it's something that other communities in this area have been fighting to regain sovereignty of. And one of the things that reminds me how to be on the land in a good way was all the rain that we've been getting for the last few days. And it made me think about how the rain cycle is part of preparedness as well. I'm like, we're always preparing to care, to then be, better prepared, to care better, and just have that cycle going. And how rain, waters the plants. It's springtime so that the plants can be, do all the bursting forth that they need to do. So then the summer they're lush and that we can harvest them in the spring. In this fall, not in the spring, in the fall. And so just thinking about those things, how does the land prepare for its own cycles, and how might I take that learning into how I prepare for mine? And then reflecting on, okay, what are my cycles? If that's not something I'm well acquainted with. And these learnings from the land are something that what a Squamish elder here, Michelle Nahaney, taught us to reflect on the land and not just acknowledge we're on stolen land, reflect on what we're learning from the land, but also our commitment to living on stolen land and repairing that colonial violence that has been enacted on the people in the land here. And so that's where emergency preparedness comes up for me, not just as something to survive an emergency and help others do the same, but as a way of looking towards the future and what does a sustainable and just future look like for the land, for the people here, whether we're settlers or not, while considering Indigenous sovereignty. And so my emergency preparedness isn't just about, the climate crisis that we have now, but it's about preparing to build more just and sustainable futures in the long run. Because I believe we don't need to just prepare to survive. That for me is kind of not how I want to think about emergency preparedness. I want to prepare for us all to thrive. And that's what excites me about preparing. And so with that, let's get into our bodies. We've talked about the time together. We've talked about me. We've talked about the land. And now let's remember we're in our bodies and we're sitting here together. We're not just bodies that carry brains around to talk and think things through, but also bodies that contain a lot of information, as we are a part of nature that we sometimes don't tap into to let us know, hey, what's going on around us. And so everything I offer as far as these body things will always be invitations. There is no need for you to participate. You can participate fully and follow the full instructions. You can participate in part. You can start participating and stop. Or you might choose to just watch and be like, this is new. Maybe this is weird, but let me check it out and see how I feel about it. So with that, I'm just gonna rock my feet back and forth. If you're sitting and your feet are on the ground, or if you're standing, or if you're walking around, just feeling, what does it feel like when I pay attention to the ground supporting me and holding me up? And maybe go on a little, mind trip and be like, whoa, these are atoms that are resisting each other. And so I'm not just melting into the ground. And these atoms have a ton of space in them. And that's kind of cool. And, these atoms are also held together through vibrations, which means my feet are not just touching the floor in the way I physically understand it, but on this other level too. These are the random thoughts I like to have as I reflect on this. You might have other thoughts. And so just welcoming those in and letting our body know, hey, we're thinking about you. You're welcome in the space. We want you to have feedback as well as our brains. And with that, moving on to thinking about how it is that burnout is currently interfering with our preparedness goals. If anyone has anything they'd like to offer, feel free to drop it in the chat as we dive into thinking about preparedness and wanting to know why you're here, and perhaps see, there I might not be the only one thinking about these things. There might be others. And one of the things I like to encourage is seeing how folks are responding in the chat and then being like, ooh, that person's speaking my language and I'd never heard this before. So maybe it's somebody I want to DM and continue talking about these things with, and getting those connections started early. And so with that, I'll leave a little pause as you think about this answer, and if you choose to, drop it in the chat.
Hi, Daniela.
Hey, Clay.
Could you kindly just repeat the question one more time, if that's okay?
Yeah. Are you able to see the screen? Am I talking this whole time?
Oh, okay. I can talk. I can switch to your screen. Sorry about that.
No, no worries. Yeah. So the question is, how is burnout interfering with our preparedness goals? I see Julie saying not enough collective spoons to collaborate and do the work that's required for prepping. Thank you, Julie. Antonio, low energy levels makes it hard to engage in new initiatives that I want to be doing. Thanks, Antonio. Tanis, individualism. Thank you. Burnout means I'm less able to connect, support with community. Thanks, Mona. No energy, motivation to tackle the long ass list of things I want to do. Thank you, Lily. All right. Yeah, it's a lot of this because we're working often as individuals. There's not enough of that energy to go around. JJ, the weight of burnout can sometimes increase my sense of urgency. I feel like I have to cram my way through prepping to buffer against the next wave of exhaustion. Yep. Clay, less capacity to prioritize. So many important tasks are being pushed aside. Yeah. Yeah, and this is so totally, the systems that we're in are designed this way, as I'm sure so many of us know. And the last one, or no, there's two more. I am exhausted. I would love to join community gardens, etc., but I don't have the spoons. Monster says so many in my community are burned out that even when we start things, they peter out. And what do I need to drop in order to add something new? Yes. Thank you all for all of those. And so we'll be touching on, what these systems are that force us into these spaces of burnout, and some of the things that we might start to incorporate in order to build some of that capacity, and also acknowledging, how nature informs that, and witnessing the pace and the cycles that nature has in incorporating new things and in growing things, in order to not feel this rush of having to do things in a linear capitalist, growth always way. But instead being like, oh no, nature is cyclical and things come and they go, and that's actually okay. It doesn't have to be a permanent growth kind of system. With that, I'll move on to the next section. Thank you all for sharing. Is naming the problem, disconnection, systems of domination, and burnout. And so with disconnection, I want to start way back about 1,000 years ago, in Europe, where I'm based in North America. And so a lot of the systems that are here and have actually extended all over the world are Western ways of being, that originated in Europe, specifically Western Europe. And so about 1,000 years ago, there was this desire to control people and land by dominating them. And that's where the word systems of domination comes in. It was seeking to control the land, to extract from it, and to control people in order to exploit their labor, to produce capital or profits, benefits for those that held the power from the labor of those people. And so thinking about that, and how that's compiled over the last few hundred years, thinking about, there was something that existed that was more land-based, over 1,000 years ago, in some European areas, and here in North America. Canada, I think, is only, so-called Canada, about 250 years old. So there's more ways to learn from those that have been tapped into the land for longer, Indigenous folks that are practicing that kind of way of being. And so when that developed in Europe, one of the examples we have is the Crusades, where folks were very purposefully going into other lands without seeing people as people, seeing them as less than. And then eventually we have that picture on the right, which is a picture of Christopher Columbus coming here to Turtle Island in Abya, which is what Indigenous folks in some South American, Central American areas call the land here, to impose his way of being. And so just recognizing that this disconnection has been happening for a while, disconnecting us from land, in order to become workers, and even those that instituted these systems were kind of disconnected from themselves in order to not be able to see the humanity in others. And so it's a long legacy of disconnection, which led to these more developed systems of domination. Colonizers understood, oh man, this is a picture of the Hudson's Bay Company. I don't know, it's not showing up. But anyways, colonizers understood that breaking systems of care, which was in a lot of cultures, was just as crucial to exerting control over these communities and their land. And they intentionally targeted cultural practices, spiritual traditions, and land ways of being, not only to extract these resources, but to exploit labor, dismantle solidarity, and increase capital. And so that picture there is a super old black and white picture of the Hudson's Bay Company in a tent, and a reminder to us that, for example, so-called Canada before it was a country, it was actually a corporation called the Hudson's Bay Company. So when these folks came over, they definitely weren't thinking of, the well-being of citizens. They were thinking, how do we make money for the folks, back in Europe? And so these systems were just never designed with regeneration or reciprocity in mind. They were built to accumulate power and not to sustain life. And the blueberry is there because I think of, folks like me. I don't have a Indigenous tradition on this land. I'm a settler. I came in through borders. And so in what ways can I tap into how my ancestors learned, and they learned from the land around them. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is notice, which is a slow process of just being with plants and witnessing them grow season after season, and the relationships they have with the other plants around them. And blueberry being something I get very excited about when I find on the streets, in little like community gardens, and traffic calming zones. I'm like, ooh, I notice, they make me happy. So what are things that you might notice that might interrupt these systems of domination, and reconnect you with some of those land-based practices and models that are available to us? And so these systems of domination led to burnout, this idea of how we labor, even if it is in systems of care. And this is a workshop for, care-centered change makers. So I imagine we're all here because we care about stuff, often in nonprofit spaces or with family around us. And so over time, this disconnection just became normalized, it became institutionalized, and many of us actually learned to kind of distrust care, to see it as a weakness or an indulgence or something we just didn't have time for. Whether we're trying to uphold, survive, or resist these systems, we'll often end up doing so at our own expense. We function without care for ourselves, each other, and the land, and we end up burning out. And burnout isn't a personal failure, it's the response to the systems of domination that we've actually internalized, because we think we don't need care. We think that sometimes we can function as individuals, or even if we don't want to function as individuals, it might be difficult for us to reconnect with others, to care for each other, or sometimes reconnect with ourselves to care for ourselves. That's why I did that foot exercise and why I have a few more. Just to remind us, our body's still here. Even when we don't need to overfunction, we often do, because we've been taught that productivity is worth more than presence. Meanwhile, the climate crisis reminds us that the earth can't keep up with these extractive expectations either. So we haven't just placed these expectations on ourselves, but also on the environment, which makes it feel like, which doesn't make it feel, which creates this crisis that we're in now. We haven't cared for ourselves, we haven't cared for others, we haven't cared for the environment. Now we have a climate crisis, and now preparedness is top of mind. But it goes back to, okay, how do we care well for each other and ourselves? And so in thinking about that, considering what does a collective future look like when it is care-based, as we're living through this care crisis, that might show up as, not having enough capacity to do the things we want to do, like it was mentioned in the chat, or, nature having disasters in different areas that show up in different ways. To move forward, we need to reclaim generative, reciprocal, and land-informed care. And we know that because that's how folks lived on this planet for millennia and millennia and millennia. And the planet supported them because they supported it. And so how do we prepare not only for disasters, but also for more caring, connected futures? Because our preparedness isn't just about having a kit, it's about reclaiming and rebuilding care-based communities and supporting each other through uncertainty so that we don't end up burning out. And so with that, I'll take another little pause. Sometimes going over things like systems of domination, it's something I talk about a lot, but it might be new for some folks, and it might just kind of stick in our bodies and feel very uncomfortable. So I'll offer this for anybody that's feeling like, what was all that? It makes sense, and my brain kind of doesn't want to think about it anymore because that seems like a lot. Just shake it off. It's not something that you'll be able to shake off, but this does support that tension that you might have noticed and built in your body, as we were talking about that. So just encouraging you to move around a little bit if that feels supportive to you. And also, I'll offer that if this is something you want to learn more about, that is something that I'll talk about more in the lab, more specifically with all the different ways that these systems show up very specifically in our lives, through perfectionism, through endless growth, through valuing written word rather than our bodies and information we're getting from the environment. So if you wanted to talk about that for 9 weeks, there is a place for that. And moving on from there, thinking about how do you care? How we care can be influenced by these systems, or perhaps we've had models in our life of how to care in more land-informed or interpersonal ways that aren't as heavily informed by those systems. And so caregiving archetypes in systems of domination. And this is kind of a list I compiled based on a lot of different archetypes that are out there, about how some of us offer these things. And as an eldest daughter, an immigrant in a Latinx family who grew up going to church, I'm one of those folks that just because I'm talking about this does not mean I'm a master of this. It means I know this stuff and I actively try and practice it, and I ask for accountability when I mess up because it is something I want to do better. But by no means am I a master. I'm a practitioner of care, and for a long time, and in many ways, these archetypes of caregiving inform my systems of domination show up in my life. And so there's tons of examples I could give as I've thought them through. And you might identify with one, a couple, a few, and they might show up in different areas or at different times for you. There's 6 of them. The first one is the overfunctioner, a person who takes on excessive responsibility in order to avoid their own needs and puts themselves in situations to burn out. And so that might show up like seeing needs. Like I used to say, I see a need, I fill a need. That is what I do. Don't ask me about what I need because I actually don't even know because I have not thought about it. So I'll burn out because I'm out here doing all these things. The next one is the self-sacrificing giver, sometimes also called the victim martyr. And this person often believes that love means putting others first. But in doing so, they avoid their own vulnerability and perhaps that connection that comes from reciprocity and reciprocal relationships. And so also puts themselves in a situation to burn out. This is something that is different when we have dependence, of course. You know, you have children, there are things that we need to do that perhaps are not coming back to us in that moment. And when I was a foster mom, that was something that I kept on reminding myself, and maybe that's something that other parents remind themselves of too, is sometimes the seeds you plant today, you might not see for a while. And that is a lesson that nature gives us. And so we might have to consider where else are we getting regeneration from, when in some circumstances we feel like we're always giving in a certain relationship, and that is what's required in that relationship at that time. The next one is the savior. One term that's often used for this one in specifically racial settings is white saviorism. And this is a person that seeks to fix others without consent, collaboration, or self-awareness. And so it's the person that says, I know what you need and I'm going to make you do it because I think that if you don't do it, you're not going to succeed. But they haven't consented to having that help. The other person hasn't consented to having that help given to them. And this person might then become frustrated. It's like, why are you not taking my help? Well, because I never asked for it. And in that way, end up burning themselves out. The fourth one is the fixer. This is someone who jumps to offer solutions prematurely as a way of avoiding personal discomfort at someone's pace in figuring something out, and puts themselves in situations to burn out. So this might look like, oh, someone's crying, you know, and I'm like, oh, what do I do to fix it right away? Because I don't want to see them crying because I'm uncomfortable with them. They might need to cry. They might need to yell. They might need to, you know, punch a pillow or something. And if I'm in that space and they're doing it, maybe they just need me to witness. So instead of jumping into fix, how do I sit with my discomfort? And then through conversation and consent, understand what is needed from me in that situation in order to not burn out because I'm fixing things that I've never been asked to fix. The second to last one is the boundaryless provider. Provide support to everyone, everywhere, all the time, as many times out of people pleasing, and puts themselves in situations of burning out. So it's kind of just also kind of that ego of wanting to be somebody that's seen as a provider, and perhaps we don't have the means to support the regenerative situation to be a provider in that way. But we want to make everybody happy and make them like us. And so we're finding worth in people thinking that we're good or rewarding us for all the many ways we give. But it's not actually sustainable for us. We go home and we might find ourselves alone and be like, oh man, I gave a lot, but nobody gave anything back. And when I need something, I haven't built those relationships where when I ask, they're used to giving something back, because often I give and give and give and haven't built that practice of having folks around me who give stuff back to me as well. And finally, the last one is, the guilt-driven giver, not the guilt. Gives time, labor, and energy out of guilt, not abundance, and puts themselves in a situation of burnout. And so they're trying to fix that guilt through giving, not actually by being like, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to confront in order to overcome that guilt, perhaps some of that shame, in order to actually repair a relationship rather than just giving stuff. And with all of these, one of the things that is often an issue within these systems of domination is that they're rewarded. Our free labor is rewarded because capitalism wants to hoard power and capital, you know, over there amongst a few. And so for those of us that are just contributing, it's happy with this. So it's like, oh, great job. You know, you're such a team player. And it taps into some of the ways that we might respond to crisis. Like for those of us that might be fawners, which are folks that just want to make everything better without actually being, oh no, this is a boundary. How do we move forward from here? Or this is something I don't have capacity for, so I'm going to move on from here. Which might feel bad because it's not rewarded in our society for us to take care of ourselves in this way. But for anybody that felt like, ooh, some of these spoke to me, one of them spoke to me, it felt like uncomfortable. Just remember that these are not flaws in our character. They're survival strategies we've learned inside systems built on hierarchy, productivity, and control. Because sometimes it can just really hit hard when something that I've built as a personal identity for myself at one point was always being the responsible one. I loved being told, you always get things done, until I realized, yeah, but now I have no energy and nobody wants to help me. And when I go home and ask for help, there's nobody there. And so having to unlearn that is a process, and our bodies are a part of that emotional grief that might arise from us. And that's why being in touch with our bodies is just as important as processing these systems through our brains. And so with that, I want to share a reflection and give you a few minutes to journal about it or draw it out, however feels good for you, and identify which of these archetypes resonate with you, and reflect when or where they arise, because certain archetypes might arise in certain settings, such as within our family or in our workplace, or maybe in our public community work, but they might not all show up all the time in all spaces. So one of the ways that we might start to reclaim some of the energy that we're just kind of giving away is identifying, in what space am I doing this? And so with that, I'll give you 3 minutes.
Daniela, can you put up the slide with the archetypes?
Yep. I'll put that reflection in the chat, and there's a slide. Thanks for that, Julie. All right, 30 seconds. All righty, folks. So with that, as you were thinking about it, perhaps you also reflected on some ways that you are thinking, I might be able to reclaim some of the energy that I'm putting into caregiving through these systems of domination. And if you have any brainstorms on that, and you want to share it in the chat, how you might avoid slipping into these archetypes, then that might be helpful for you and for other folks in the space again. So one example I can give is I noticed that I would always want to be that giver, the person that wanted to be fixing all of the things and jumping and not sitting with my discomfort. And that's kind of why I have so many reminders in my workshop and in my life. Pause, check in with my body. How do I hold discomfort? Or how do I move through it in order to actually show up in the way that's needed in the space? And another reason I'm asking folks to put it in the chat and encouraging you to talk with each other, because it's a way for me to kind of outsource this work of preparedness as you start talking with each other and brainstorming with others who hold similar values, have similar language, and are working towards similar goals. You've extended that network, that web. It doesn't point to a single person, which is something that these systems often like to recreate, these systems of hierarchy, placing one person as the expert, rather than, no, we all have lived experience. We might just not have had the language or the frameworks for putting all of our lived experience within in order to understand it. And so with that, I want to, offer that if you want to share it in the chat, or maybe unmute and share it out loud if that's more accessible for you. So that, we can connect with each other more than, making someone like a teacher happy, which is something that we're again taught in these systems, is how to show up in order to perform knowing stuff or perform attentiveness in a classroom or learning setting. I want to encourage connection. So I'll be quiet now and let folks unmute or drop in the chat. I see Chris, the overfunctioner resonated most with me. I find myself from time to time saying, I'm just trying to save the world. And when I do, it's a good reminder that I'm overextending myself and taking on excessive responsibility. Then it's time to step back and get back into my beautiful lane. Thanks so much for that reflection, Chris. Yes, that is a beautiful reflection. And I'm glad you have that little phrase that pops up in your brain. It's so helpful. Gagan, tuning into the body. Is the body saying yes when I'm caring for others, or am I contracted? Thanks for sharing again. Totally. Mona, I remind myself that I can't pour from an empty cup. And then 1, prioritize rest. 2, let go of mom guilt. 3, connect with nature in my garden or the forest. And 4, dance. Thanks so much for sharing that, Mona. Totally. I like to think about how joy and celebration can also be part of preparedness. JJ, create reminders from keywords, things around you, and situations that show up in your day-to-day to name what archetype you might be leaning into as an observation, not a judgment. Thanks, JJ. Bree, overfunctioner here. I've learned to become more comfortable with no is a complete sentence. I have stopped over explaining why I can't take on one more thing, and then I go outside and walk in the grass. Thanks, Bree. Antonio, I resonate with the fixer over functioner, stems from a scarcity mindset in my case. Taking a deep breath works for me when I can remember to. Liz, the guilt savior one shows up for me with my family. I have to remind myself that I can't save my mom and I don't owe her everything just for being born. Thanks so much for sharing, Liz. Great. Thank you all for, very vulnerable personal shares. I'm always a little bit nervous to ask these questions, and that's why I like to preface things by saying these are invitations to participate, because there's a lot wrapped up in a lot of these things. And so thank you for sharing. Thanks for sharing, those phrases and thoughts that come up for you as you check yourself before you slip into something. I like the reminders, JJ. I have posters around me when I'm trying to learn something new to remind me that I'm trying to become this new person and not just slip into my regular way of being. The last one I see, Julie, disability justice principles for everyone. Thank you, Julie, and for real, for real. And with that, we'll tap into our body again. And Antonio mentioned this one, taking a breath, checking with your body and taking a breath. And so with that, I'll offer a box breath, which is counting to 4 on the way in as you inhale, holding it for 4 counts, exhaling for 4 counts, and holding it at the bottom for 4 counts. And the reason I'm doing all these different ones is because some of them might not resonate with us. Some of them might not be accessible for us. Some of them might feel uncomfortable. But if we're talking about our feet, about breathing, about shaking, like there's different things that we might find one that works for us as a way to connect with our body in a way that feels comfortable and supportive. And so with that, I'll breathe in on 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right. Hopefully a little bit of a reset for some of us if that's how that experience feels for you. And we'll move on to land-informed caregiving archetypes. And this is one that I've kind of compiled based on reflections and things that I've seen online. So this isn't like one that you can find easily. But it's one that, if you're into nerding out about this stuff, you could probably create for yourself. And I just want to offer it as an alternative way of moving through the world. And there's 6 archetypes in here too. And the thing is, you're probably already doing these things. We're not all just recreators of systems of domination. Like we're also doing all these natural things because we are nature. And so perhaps there's some here that you identify as things that you lean into or might embody or might have been interested in embodying and haven't stepped into yet. So the first one of the 6 of them is the pollinator. And so think of like bees and butterflies, they model like light touch. They're kind of just joy-centered. They're exchangers of ideas and information, taking pollen from one place to another place. They run on vibes. And if you haven't seen bees and how they choose the flower they're going to, it's based on frequency. So it's like literally vibes, and they don't overstay their time, and they don't go to places that have low vibes because they know there's no pollen there. And so, that is legit. If you're somebody that's like, I don't like the vibes in this place, I'm stepping out. Be a bee. That is welcome. The mycelial network, which is that underground network of mushrooms, the part that we don't see. We see the really cool mushrooms that come up, but there's a whole network below, and these can be huge. There's one that's like half the size of the state of Oregon, which is like, whoa. And these are fungal root systems. So they're unseen, but they're deeply connected. They care for everything around them, and they're always communicating, and they're decentralized. There's not one point that is like, the point that all the information goes. It's just all sharing. And they're adaptable. So they can be, on a tree root. They can be deeper in the ground. They can be in a mulch over there. They're not flashy, but they're very resilient. And so thinking about that as well, are you somebody that likes like behind the scenes kind of work? But you can remain consistent because you remain behind the scenes, perhaps. The tide. And when I was thinking about this one, I thought of YK Hong. If you've seen them on Instagram, there's somebody that talks about creating these movements of resistance as waves. You come in strong, and then you retreat and rest, and then you come back. And so the tide is connected with the moon phases, thinking of how it rises and it falls. It models boundaries. You know, when it has the energy, it moves in, but when it doesn't have the energy, it departs, and it returns to a place where it regenerates. It has a pace and it has sovereignty. It's making its choices, but it requires its supports, like the moon, to be present in a way that we experience as people on shore, for example. And so thinking, oh, for some of us, it might be going into action, but not being able to sustain it in the way that's often rewarded as consistent. You know, we might be going in and be going out. And that is something that nature models for us. We don't have to be there all the time. The fourth of the six of them is the canopy tree. With these big old growth trees, you know, they model steady, grounded, long-term relational presence. They create ecosystems in and of themselves because they're so big. There's all these things that depend on them and grow on them and stuff. And they grow slowly and they nourish widely. They have, you know, their branches, their trunk, their leaves, their roots. These are all parts of an ecosystem. And sometimes we might think of elders or folks who hold a lot of knowledge in our spaces, like old growth trees in that way. They offer guidance, not solution, presence. There's someone that you go to. So you might be a kind of caregiver that's not out on the streets doing things. You might be the place where people go. And that is how you offer care. People come to you. To ask for, you know, information or wisdom or presence, or just to sit with you. Some folks, you know, just sitting beside folks can make us feel good too. And you might be somebody that's great
in like the Vancouver area, and they just like let people comment for like, I don't know, a bunch of hours, and then they close the comments, and then you can go back and you can find that posting for your city.
Yeah, totally. I remember that. Thanks so much for reminding us of that, Monster. Awesome. And if folks want to unmute, because I'm like, I'm just hanging out waiting for questions. If you have a question, you're like, oh, I don't want to put it in the chat, or you want to DM me about it and chat about it later, let me know. But yeah, I'll just hang out here to make sure we all leave in a good way. I'll stop the share. And stop.